They said it was suicide. They said the moment the first snowflake touched the ground, Lena Vance should have barred her door and prayed. But history isn't written by those who hide. It is written by the woman who walked into a whiteout to save a life that the rest of the territory wanted dead. On a freezing night in November 1883, Lena made a choice that brought an entire Apache war party to her doorstep. But what happened when the sun rose wasn't a massacre. It was a miracle that Silver Creek never forgot. This is the true, untold story of the siege of Blackwood Ridge. The winter of 1883 came to the Montana Territory not as a season, but as a sentence. The locals of Silver Creek called it the White Death. It was the kind of cold that snapped iron nails and turned breath into ice before it left your lips. Lena Vance lived 3 miles outside of town, perched precariously on the edge of Blackwood Ridge. At 28, she was already a widow, her husband taken by a fever 2 years prior, leaving her with nothing but a drafty cabin, a Winchester 1873 rifle, and a reputation for being difficult. In the harsh lexicon of the frontier, difficult simply meant she refused to remarry the first drifter who offered to fix her roof. It was November 14th, late afternoon. The sky had turned the color of a bruised plum, heavy and low. Lena was out by the woodpile, her knuckles raw, inside her leather gloves, as she split logs with a desperate rhythm. She knew what was coming. The silence of the woods wasn't peaceful. It was predatory. "Get inside, Lena." The shout came from the trail. It was Silas Thorne, the town's self-appointed mayor and owner of the only dry goods store. He sat atop his gelding, his coat collar turned up against the biting wind. "Storm's going to be a killer," Silas yelled over the rising gale. "You need to come into town. The widow's sanctuary is open." Lena didn't stop swinging the axe. Thwack. The wood split cleanly. "I'm fine where I am, Silas. I've got wood and venison." "Don't be stubborn, woman," Silas growled, his horse shifting uneasily. "There's talk of an Apache raiding party moving south from the reservation border. Red Cloud's men. They're hungry and they're desperate. You're out here alone." "I have my rifle," Lena said, finally looking up. Her eyes were gray and hard, matching the incoming storm. "And I trust the Apache more than I trust some of the men in your sanctuary, Silas." Silas sneered, pulling his reins tight. "Have it your way. But when the snow buries you, don't expect us to dig you out until spring." He rode off, disappearing into the tree line just as the first flakes began to fall. Thick, heavy clumps that stuck to everything they touched. By nightfall, the world had vanished. The cabin groaned under the assault of the wind. Lena sat by the hearth, cleaning her Winchester. She was used to the solitude, but tonight felt different. The wind sounded like human screaming. Around midnight, the screaming stopped sounding like the wind. Lena froze. She lowered the rifle, tilting her head toward the door. It was a faint, rhythmic sound, barely audible over the storm's roar. Cry, pause, cry, pause. It wasn't a coyote. It wasn't a wolf. Lena threw a heavy shawl over her shoulders, lit a kerosene lantern, and unbarred the door. The wind slammed into her with the force of a physical blow, nearly extinguishing the light. "Hello," she screamed into the white void. Nothing but the howl of the gale. She stepped out onto the porch, the snow instantly swirling up to her knees. She was about to turn back, convinced her mind was playing tricks on her, when she saw it. A dark shape, mostly buried, about 20 yards from the porch near the tree line. It looked like a fallen log, but logs didn't whimper. Lena didn't think. She didn't consider Silas's warning about the raiding parties. She dropped the lantern, plunging herself into darkness, and ran. She stumbled through the drifts, falling twice, her hands burning as they hit the frozen snow. When she reached the shape, her heart stopped. It was a woman, an indigenous woman, face down in the snow. She wore deerskin leathers that were frozen stiff. Lena rolled her over, but the woman's eyes were fixed and glassy, staring up at the storm that had killed her. She had been dead for hours, but the bundle strapped to her chest was moving. Lena frantically used her frozen fingers to pry at the stiff leather straps. Beneath the mother's cold body, shielded from the worst of the wind, was a cradleboard. Inside, wrapped in rabbit fur, was a baby. The child was blue-lipped, its cries weak and fading. "I've got you," Lena gasped, tears freezing on her cheeks. "I've got you." She couldn't free the cradleboard. The knots were frozen solid. With a surge of adrenaline fueled by pure panic, Lena grabbed the dead woman's knife from her belt, sawed through the leather straps, and clutched the bundle to her chest. She ran back to the cabin, the wind trying to shove her down, the cold trying to stop her heart. She kicked the door shut behind her and barred it, collapsing onto the floor in front of the dying fire. She unwrapped the furs. The baby was a boy, no more than 6 months old. He was silent now, his eyes closed. "No, no, no," Lena whispered. She stripped off her wet gloves and placed her warm hands on the infant's chest. A heartbeat, faint, like a bird fluttering against a cage. For the next 6 hours, Lena Vance waged a war against death. She didn't sleep. She used her own body heat, warm stones from the fire wrapped in cloth, and drops of warm goat's milk squeezed from a rag. By 4 a.m., the color returned to the boy's cheeks. By 5 a.m., he let out a strong, hungry wail. Lena slumped back against the hearth, exhausted. She looked at the baby, really looked at him for the first time. He had thick black hair and dark, inquisitive eyes. The intricate beadwork on the cradleboard was specific. Royal blue and crimson. Lena's stomach dropped. She had seen those patterns before, trading at the outpost. This wasn't just any child. This was the son of a high-ranking warrior, perhaps even a chief. And his mother was lying dead in Lena's front yard. If the town found him, they would kill him or send him to an orphanage to be stripped of his name. If the Apache found him and found his mother dead on Lena's land, they would burn the cabin to the ground with Lena inside. She was trapped. Morning brought a deceptive calm. The sun was blindingly bright, reflecting off 3 feet of fresh snow. The storm had broken, but the temperature hovered at 20 below zero. Lena knew she had to move the mother's body. She couldn't leave her exposed to the wolves, and she couldn't leave her visible from the road. It was a grim, back-breaking task. Lena wrapped the woman in an old canvas tarp and dragged her into the woodshed, covering her with a stack of firewood. It was the most respectful burial she could offer in the frozen earth. Inside the cabin, the baby, whom Lena had mentally named Sam for the time being, was sleeping soundly in a laundry basket lined with quilts. Around noon, Lena saw riders approaching. She grabbed the Winchester and checked the load. She peered through the slat in the window shutter. It wasn't the Apache. It was worse. It was Sheriff Caleb Thorne, Silas's brother, and 2 of his deputies, drunk on power and likely whiskey. Lena hid the laundry basket under her bed, draping a heavy quilt over the side to muffle any sound. She stepped out onto the porch, rifle cradled in her arm. "Sheriff?" she greeted coldly. Caleb Thorne was a large man who wore his badge like a license to hunt. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the pristine snow. Lena, surprised you didn't freeze. Silas was betting you'd be a statue by morning. Silas lost his bet. What do you want, Caleb? Caleb dismounted, his boots crunching loudly. He walked up the steps, invading her space. We found tracks. Horse tracks. About 2 miles east of here. Looked like an Apache pony. Riderless. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. I haven't seen anything. Is that so? Caleb narrowed his eyes. Because the tracks led this way before the snow covered him up. We think a scout might have got separated from the raiding party. Maybe froze to death. Maybe seeking shelter. He took a step closer to the door. Mind if we take a look inside? Just for your safety, of course. I mind, Lena said, cocking the lever of the Winchester. The metallic clack was deafening in the silent air. A woman living alone doesn't let 3 men into her house, badge or not. Caleb stopped. The 2 deputies behind him put their hands on their revolvers. You're making a mistake, Lena, Caleb said softly, his voice laced with menace. If you're hiding a redskin, that's treason. We hang people for that. I'm hiding nothing but my dignity, Caleb. Get off my porch. For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Then from inside the cabin, a sound pierced the air. It wasn't a cry. It was the sound of a pot falling off the table. Sam must have kicked the basket leg. Caleb's eyes lit up. Dignity, huh? Sounds like you got company. He shoved past Lena. She swung the rifle barrel toward him, but one of the deputies was faster, grabbing the barrel and wrenching it from her grip. Lena was thrown against the railing. Caleb kicked the door open and stormed inside. No! Lena screamed, scrambling to her feet. She rushed in, just as Caleb flipped the bed frame. He froze. He looked at the basket, then at the baby inside. Sam looked up at the sheriff and gurgled, waving a small brown fist. Caleb stared for a second, and then a cruel, satisfied smile spread across his face. He reached down and picked the baby up by the back of his shirt, like a sack of flour. Well, well, Caleb laughed. Looks like we caught us a little warrior. Put him down. Lena lunged at him, but the deputy caught her, pinning her arms behind her back. This is evidence, Lena, Caleb sneered. This here is bait. You know how much the government pays for a captive hostile? Even a small one. He's a baby, Lena screamed, struggling against the deputy's grip. He's innocent. His mother is dead. Good, Caleb said. One less to worry about. We'll take the brat back to town, lock him in the jail cell. When his daddy comes looking, we'll be ready. We'll ambush the whole lot of them. Caleb walked toward the door, the baby dangling from his grip. Sam began to wail, a terrified, high-pitched shriek. You can't do this, Lena pleaded. He'll freeze. He needs milk. Caleb turned at the doorway. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to become a traitor. Deputy, bring her too. She can watch what happens when you side with the enemy. As they dragged Lena out of her cabin, the wind began to pick up again. But it wasn't the storm returning. From the ridge above the cabin, a glint of light flashed. Then another. Lena saw it, even if the men didn't. Mirrors. Signal mirrors. The Apache weren't coming. They were already here. The procession down the mountain was slow and treacherous. Caleb Thorne rode his horse, the reins in one hand and the crying bundle that was the Apache infant tucked recklessly under his arm. He had tied Lena's hands to his saddle horn with a length of rough hemp rope, forcing her to walk behind his horse through the knee-deep drifts. The 2 deputies, Miller and Jenkins, rode flank, their eyes scanning the dense tree line, nervous sweat freezing on their brows, despite the biting cold. "Keep up, woman," Caleb grunted, jerking the reins. The rope snapped taut, pulling Lena off balance. She stumbled, falling face first into the snow, but scrambled up instantly, ignoring the stinging pain in her wrists. She couldn't fall behind. She couldn't lose sight of the baby. "He's cold, Caleb," Lena screamed, her voice hoarse. "He's going to die if you don't cover his head." "Shut your mouth," Caleb spat. "He's tough, like a coyote." They were passing through a narrow gorge known as Devil's Throat. Steep rock faces rose on either side, capped with heavy drifts of snow. It was a natural kill zone. Lena knew it. The horses knew it, their ears twitching nervously. Suddenly, the wind died down. The silence that followed was louder than the storm. Thwack! There was no gunshot, just the wet, sickening sound of impact. Deputy Miller, riding on the left, stiffened. He looked down, a look of confusion on his face, at the arrow shaft protruding from his chest. He didn't make a sound. He simply slid sideways off his saddle, landing softly in the snow. "Ambush!" Jenkins screamed, fumbling for his revolver. Chaos erupted. From the ridge above, a war cry shattered the air, a terrifying rhythmic ululation that turned the blood to ice. Gunfire erupted from the trees, not the wild shots of panicked men, but disciplined, rhythmic fire. Jenkins' horse reared, throwing him into a snowbank. Before he could rise, two figures dropped from the rocks above. They moved with fluid, deadly grace. Knives flashed in the winter sun. Jenkins didn't stand a chance. Caleb Thorne, showing the true depth of his cowardice, didn't draw his weapon to fight. He kicked his horse violently, trying to gallop through the choke point. "Yah!" he screamed, dragging Lena behind him. The horse surged forward. Lena was yanked off her feet. She was being dragged through the snow, her breath knocked out of her, debris tearing at her skirt. She clawed at the rope, screaming, but the horse was too strong. Then a shot rang out from the rocks, a precise shot. Caleb's horse collapsed mid-stride, a bullet in its skull. Caleb was thrown clear, landing hard on his shoulder. The baby flew from his grip, the basket tumbling into a drift. The rope went slack. Lena gasped for air, scrambling to her knees. She didn't look at Caleb. She didn't look at the dead deputies. She crawled toward the drift, where the baby had landed. "Sam!" she choked out. She reached the bundle just as a shadow fell over her. Lena froze. She looked up. Standing over her was a warrior. He was immense, wrapped in buffalo robes, his face painted with streaks of black and yellow ochre. He held a Winchester pointed directly at her forehead. His eyes were dark, burning with a mixture of grief and rage. Around them, a dozen other warriors emerged from the trees like ghosts. They encircled the scene, weapons raised. Caleb was groaning nearby, trying to reach for his fallen pistol. A warrior stepped on his hand, crushing the bones. Caleb screamed. The large warrior looked at Lena, then at the bundle in her arms. He cocked the rifle. "No!" Lena didn't beg for her life. She ripped the blanket away from the baby's face, holding him up like an offering. "Look, he's alive! He's alive!" The baby, miraculously unharmed by the fall, let out a sharp cry. The warrior's eyes widened. He lowered the rifle inches, his gaze shifting from Lena's desperate face to the child. He saw the rabbit fur wrappings Lena had added. He saw the wool scarf, her scarf, tucked around the boy's neck. He stepped forward, snatching the baby from Lena. He inspected the child frantically, his rough hands surprisingly gentle as he checked for injuries. When he saw the boy was warm and unharmed, A sound escaped his throat, half sob, half growl. He looked back at Lena. He gestured to the cabin back up the trail. You? He asked. His English was broken, thick with an accent, but understandable. Yes, Lena nodded, tears streaming down her face. I found him. In the storm. The warrior stared at her for a long beat. Then he looked at the dead woman's knife that still hung at Lena's belt, the one she had used to cut the baby free. He recognized the handle. Where is Kinta? He asked, his voice trembling. Lena pointed back toward her cabin. The shed. I buried her as best I could. In the woodpile, to keep the wolves away. The warrior closed his eyes. He said something in his native tongue, a low, mournful phrase. Then he opened his eyes, and the grief was replaced by cold fury. He turned to Caleb, who was now being held up by two warriors. And him? The warrior asked Lena. He is your man? No, Lena spat, standing up on shaky legs. He tried to steal the boy. He was taking us to jail. The warrior, who Lena would later learn was named Black Fox, a war chief of the Chiricahua band, nodded once. It was a nod of judgment. Take them, Black Fox commanded his men. Take them to the house of the white woman. The cabin, once a place of solitude, was now a fortress. Lena sat at her kitchen table, her hands trembling around a tin cup of water. The cabin was filled with 12 Apache warriors. They moved with an efficiency that unnerved her. They had barred the door, shuttered the windows, and positioned themselves at the firing slits. Black Fox sat opposite her. He held his son, whose true name was Chayton, against his chest. The baby was sleeping, finally peaceful. You gave him milk, Black Fox said. It wasn't a question. Goat's milk, Lena whispered. It was all I had. You saved the son of a chief, Black Fox said solemnly. My wife, Kinta. She was separated from us in the whiteout. The pony bolted. We searched for 2 days. She died protecting him, Lena said softly. She shielded him with her body. Black Fox looked away, his jaw tightening. A silent tear tracked through the war paint on his cheek. He wiped it away quickly. You have the heart of a bear, Lena Vance. The Apache do not forget debts. Suddenly a shout came from outside. Open up! We know you're in there. It was Silas Thorne. Lena rushed to the peephole in the door. Her blood ran cold. Down at the base of the clearing, a mob had formed. It wasn't just Silas. It was half the town of Silver Creek, 30 men, maybe 40. They carried torches, rifles, and pitchforks. They looked like a dark stain spreading across the snow. What is happening? Black Fox asked, moving to her side, his rifle ready. Silas, Lena said, panic rising in her throat. One of the deputies. He must have run while you were fighting Caleb. He went back to town. He told them you attacked us. He told them lies, Black Fox growled. He told them you killed me, Lena realized, horror dawning on her. They think they are coming to avenge me, or rescue me. They are coming for blood, Black Fox corrected. They want the boy, and they want scalps. Outside, Silas's voice boomed again. We know you savages are in there. We have you surrounded. Send out Sheriff Thorne and the girl, and maybe we'll hang you quick. In the corner of the room, Caleb Thorne was bound hand and foot, gagged with a strip of leather. His eyes were wide with terror. Black Fox looked at his men. They were outnumbered 3-1. They had ammunition, but the cabin was made of wood. If the townspeople used the torches, we fight, Black Fox said simply. We die here, but Chayton lives. No, Lena said firmly. She turned to the chief. If you fight, everyone dies. They'll burn this cabin down with all of us inside. They don't care about the truth. Then what? Black Fox asked. I go out there, Lena said. The room went silent. The warriors looked at her. You go out, they take you, Black Fox said. Then they burn us. Not if I make them listen, Lena said, grabbing her heavy coat. Silas is a businessman. He's a coward, just like his brother. If I show them I'm alive, if I tell them the truth, they will call you traitor, Black Fox warned. They will say you lay with the enemy. You will never be safe in this town again. Lena looked at the baby, sleeping in Black Fox's arms. She looked at Caleb, the man who was supposed to protect the law, but had tried to sell a child. Then she looked at Black Fox, a man the newspapers called a monster, who was looking at her with nothing but respect. I was never safe in that town, Lena said, her voice steel. Open the door. Black Fox hesitated. He looked into her eyes, searching for deceit. Finding none, he nodded to the warrior at the door. If they shoot, Black Fox said, raising his Winchester, we kill them all. The heavy wooden bar was lifted. The door creaked open. The wind had picked up again, swirling the snow around the porch. The mob down below fell silent as the door opened. Rifles were raised. Hammers were cocked. Lena stepped out onto the porch. She stood tall, her hands empty, the wind whipping her hair across her face. She looked down at the men she had known her whole life. The baker, the blacksmith, the preacher. Lower your guns, she screamed, her voice echoing off the valley walls. Lena! Silas yelled, stepping forward. You're alive. Run, girl. Run down here. We'll cover you. I'm not running, Silas, she shouted back. And you're not shooting. There is no massacre here. There is only a grieving father and his child. A murmur went through the crowd. This wasn't the story the deputy had told them. They've turned her mind, Silas shouted, turning to the mob. They've bewitched her. Or they've got a gun to her back. Fire. Fire on the cabin. No. Lena jumped in front of the door, spreading her arms wide. If you fire through me. The mob hesitated. They were angry men, but shooting a white woman, a widow, in broad daylight, that was a line few were willing to cross. She's a traitor, Silas screamed, his face purple with rage. She's protecting the savages. Move aside, Lena, or so help me God. Silas raised his rifle. He aimed it directly at Lena's chest. I said move. Lena didn't flinch. She stared down the barrel of the gun. Shoot me then, Silas. But know this. If I die, the sheriff dies too. He's inside. Silas froze. Caleb. Alive, Lena bluffed. But if one bullet hits this wood, the deal is off. It was a standoff. The tension was so thick it felt like the air was made of glass, ready to shatter. And then, from the dark interior of the cabin, movement. Black Fox stepped out. He didn't hide behind Lena. He stepped next to her. He didn't raise his weapon. He stood with his arms crossed, staring down at the mob with regal, terrifying calm. Then another warrior stepped out, and another. 12 Apache warriors lined the porch of the tiny cabin, flanking Lena Vance. They stood like statues, silent and imposing. It was an image that would be burned into the history of the West. The widow of Blackwood Ridge, standing shoulder to shoulder with the enemy, defying her own people. Go home, Silas, Lena said, her voice quiet, but carrying in the wind. Take your mob and go home. There is no death for you here today unless you ask for it. Silas's finger trembled on the trigger. He looked at the 12 warriors. He looked at the uncertain faces of his townsmen. He knew he was losing them. But Silas Thorne was a spiteful man. Burn it, he whispered to the man next to him. Burn them all out. The man next to him lit a Molotov, a whiskey bottle stuffed with an oily rag. "No!" Lena screamed. The man wound up to throw. Bang! The bottle shattered in the man's hand, exploding in a ball of fire. The man screamed, diving into the snow to put out the flames on his sleeve. The shot hadn't come from the cabin. Everyone turned. On the ridge opposite the cabin, the high ground behind the mob, silhouettes appeared against the setting sun. Not 12, not 20, hundreds. The full force of the Apache Nation had arrived. The valley of Silver Creek fell into a silence so profound it felt heavy, like a physical weight pressing down on the chests of the 40 men standing in the snow. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long, blood-red shadows across the snow. On the high ridges surrounding Lena's cabin, the silhouettes of the Apache warriors were motionless against the dying light. They didn't yell. They didn't shoot. They simply watched. It was a display of power that rendered the town's angry mob instantly insignificant. Silas Thorne lowered his rifle. His face, flushed red with rage only moments ago, was now the color of old parchment. The whiskey bottle bomb lay harmlessly in the snow, a dark stain where the fuel had leaked out. Lena stood on the porch, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at Black Fox. He hadn't flinched. He was looking up at the ridge and gave a single, subtle nod. From the center of the ridgeline, a single rider began to descend. The slope was steep, treacherous with ice, but the spotted pony navigated it with goat-like agility. The rider was an older man, his face a map of deep lines, wearing a headdress of eagle feathers that trailed down to the horse's flank. "Chief Tallbear," Black Fox whispered to Lena. "My father." The old chief rode slowly into the yard, stopping 10 paces from the mob. He carried no rifle, only a ceremonial lance wrapped in otter fur. He looked at the armed townsmen with an expression of utter boredom, as if they were nothing more than annoying insects. Then his gaze shifted to the porch, to Black Fox, and finally to the bundle in Black Fox's arms. Tallbear said nothing. He simply held out his arms. Black Fox stepped off the porch. The snow crunched loudly under his moccasins. He walked past Lena, past the shivering Caleb Thorne, who was still bound and gagged, and approached his father. He lifted the baby, Chayton, up to the old chief. Tallbear took his grandson. He pulled back the blanket, inspecting the boy's face. A slow nod. Then he looked at Lena. He spoke in Apache, his voice gravelly and deep. Black Fox translated, his voice carrying across the yard so every man in the mob could hear. "My father asks, who is the woman who carries the knife of Kinta?" Lena stepped forward. Her legs felt like jelly, but she forced her spine straight. "I am Lena Vance." Tallbear looked at her for a long time. Then he pointed the tip of his lance at Silas Thorne. "He asks," Black Fox continued, "why this man wishes to burn the woman who saved the grandson of a chief." Silas tried to muster his bravado. "This is our land. That woman is harboring hostiles. She kidnapped the sheriff." "Liar!" The shout came from the porch. It wasn't Lena. It was Caleb Thorne. One of the warriors had cut the gag from his mouth. Caleb was weeping, snot freezing on his upper lip. He saw the hundreds of warriors on the ridges. He saw the death waiting for him. He knew his brother Silas couldn't save him. "Shut up, Caleb," Silas roared. "No," Caleb screamed, his voice cracking. "I won't die for your prophet, Silas. Tell them why we came." Caleb looked frantically at Tallbear, then at Black Fox. It wasn't about the law. It was the bounty. The darker markets in St. Louis. They pay $500 for Apache children. Healthy ones. Silas found the buyer. He made me do it. A gasp rippled through the mob. The townsmen looked at Silas. They were hard men, prejudiced men. But child trafficking was a sin that even the rough frontier couldn't stomach. You were going to sell the baby? The blacksmith, a burly man named Jensen, lowered his shotgun. He turned to Silas. You told us the savages killed a family. You said we were here for justice. It's war, Silas shrieked, backing away as his own men stepped away from him. They are the enemy. What does it matter what happens to one of their brats? Black Fox handed his rifle to the warrior beside him. He walked toward Caleb Thorne. He cut the ropes binding the sheriff's feet, then the ropes on his hands. Go, Black Fox said. Caleb blinked, rubbing his wrists. What? Go to your people, Black Fox said. Let them judge you. Caleb scrambled off the porch, running toward the mob, but the townsmen parted like the Red Sea. Nobody wanted to stand near him. Black Fox turned to Silas. Take your brother. Take your men. Leave this place. If one of you steps foot on this ridge again before the snow melts, we will not send a warning next time. We will send arrows. Silas looked at the ridges. He looked at the disgust on the faces of his neighbors. He realized he had lost, not just the battle, but his grip on the town. This isn't over, Lena, Silas hissed, climbing onto his horse. You think you're a hero? You're a pariah. Don't bother coming into town for flour. Don't bother coming for medicine. You're dead to us. Silas turned his horse and galloped away. Caleb scrambled onto a deputy's horse, riding double, fleeing like a whipped dog. Slowly, the rest of the mob dispersed. They didn't look at Lena. They hung their heads in shame and fear, riding back into the darkness. When they were gone, Lena turned to the Apache. Thank you, she whispered. Tall Bear handed the baby back to Black Fox. He looked at Lena and spoke one last phrase. He says, Black Fox translated, a small, sad smile touching his lips, that the white ghost is now a daughter of the thunder. You are blood to us, Lena Vance. The warriors mounted their ponies. One by one, they vanished into the night, leaving Lena alone in the silence of the aftermath. She was alive. But as she looked at the empty trail leading to Silver Creek, she realized Silas was right. She had survived the siege, but the isolation was just beginning. December brought a cold that shattered thermometers. It had been 3 weeks since the siege. In that time, Lena had not spoken to a single human being. She had tried to go into town once, 4 days after the incident. She needed kerosene and salt. When she walked into Thorne's general store, the conversation died instantly. Silas wasn't there, but his clerk, a pimply boy named Matthew, refused to look her in the eye. We're out of stock, Matthew had mumbled, staring at the counter. I see the salt right there on the shelf, Matthew, Lena had said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. It's reserved, Matthew said, his voice rising. It's all reserved. Please, Mrs. Vance, just leave. If Silas knows I talked to you. She walked to the church next. The Reverend, a man she had baked pies for every Sunday for 5 years, locked the doors as he saw her approach. She was a ghost. They hadn't killed her with bullets. They were trying to kill her with silence. By mid-December, the situation was critical. Lena was down to her last sack of flour. The woodpile was dwindling fast, and her axe handle had splintered. The deer had moved south into the deep valleys to escape the wind, making hunting near the ridge impossible. Starvation wasn't a dramatic event. It was a slow, lethargic gray fog. On the night of December 21st, the winter solstice, Lena sat by a dying fire. She was boiling water to drink, just to feel something warm in her stomach. She wrapped herself in every blanket she owned. Just sleep, she told herself. Just sleep, and maybe the fever will take you. She drifted into a fitful doze, dreaming of heat and bread. Thump. A heavy sound on the porch woke her. Lena sat up, her hand instinctively going to the Winchester leaning against the chair. Was it Silas? Had he finally built up the courage to finish the job? She waited. Silence. She crept to the door, unbarring it with stiff, frozen fingers. She cracked it open. The porch was empty. But lying on the doormat was a pile of goods. A freshly killed buck, gutted and cleaned. A large sack made of woven reeds filled with dried corn. A jar of honey. And a new axe handle carved from smooth, strong hickory. Lena stepped out, looking toward the tree line. The snow was falling softly, but she saw the tracks. Moccasin prints. She wasn't alone. From that night on, the ghost watch began. Every 3 days, supplies would appear. Sometimes it was meat, sometimes dried berries, sometimes bundles of dry kindling. They never showed themselves. They never knocked. It was a silent pact of survival. The town wanted her to starve. The Apache ensured she feasted. But secrets in a small town like Silver Creek do not stay secret forever. January 1884. Silas Thorne sat in the back room of the saloon, pouring a glass of expensive scotch for a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. The man's name was Jasper Keene. He wasn't a sheriff, and he wasn't a soldier. In the West, they called men like him regulators. In reality, he was a hitman who specialized in range wars. "She's still alive," Silas muttered, slamming his glass down. 2 months without supplies. She should be a frozen corpse by now. But I saw smoke from her chimney this morning. Keene swirled his drink, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of a black hat. People are hard to kill, Mr. Thorne, especially women. They hold on to life out of spite. "It's the savages," Silas spat. "They're feeding her, making a fool of me. If the territory finds out I can't even control one widow on my own ridge, I'll lose the mayoral election in spring. I want her gone, Keene, and I want it to look like an accident." Keene looked up. His eyes were pale blue, devoid of warmth. "Accidents are expensive. A fire, a fall, a fire." Silas nodded eagerly. "Wood stoves are dangerous in winter. A tragedy. The whole town will mourn her, and I'll buy the land cheap." 500, Keene said. "Done." Keene stood up, adjusting the heavy Colt revolvers on his hips. "I'll ride out tonight. No moon. It'll be done by sunrise." Back at the ridge, Lena felt a strange unease. The wolves were howling, but their call was different tonight. Urgent. She was skinning a rabbit the unseen guardians had left earlier that day when she heard the crunch of snow. It wasn't the stealthy step of an Apache. It was the heavy, confident stride of a man who didn't care if he was heard. Lena blew out the lantern instantly. She grabbed the Winchester and moved to the window. A shadow was moving near the woodshed. Then, a flicker of light. A match. He was lighting a torch. Lena didn't hesitate. She smashed the glass of the window with the butt of her rifle and leveled the barrel. "Get away from there," she screamed. Keene didn't panic. He didn't even look startled. He simply tossed the lit torch onto the roof of the woodshed. The dry cedar shingles caught instantly. Then he turned toward the window, raising his revolver with terrifying speed. Bang. Wood splintered inches from Lena's face. She ducked, scrambling across the floor. "Come out, Mrs. Vance," Keen shouted, his voice calm, professional. House is going to go up fast. Don't make me come in and drag you out. Lena crawled toward the back door. The woodshed was attached to the cabin. The heat was already radiating through the wall. She could hear the crackle of the flames growing into a roar. She kicked the back door open and rolled out into the snow, staying low. Bang! Bang! 2 shots kicked up snow, right beside her head. Keen was already circling the house. He was fast, too fast. Lena scrambled behind the water trough. She cocked her rifle, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The fire was illuminating the yard, turning the night into day. She had nowhere to hide. There you are, Keen drawled. He was standing 20 yards away, silhouetted against the burning shed. He raised his gun. Lena tried to aim, but her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't find the sight. Keen pulled the hammer back. Nothing personal, ma'am. Thwip. The sound was quiet, like a whisper. Keen flinched. A look of genuine confusion crossed his face. He looked down at his chest. The fletching of an arrow was protruding from his sternum. He looked up, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. I'll be damned, he wheezed. He fell forward, face first into the snow. Lena stared at the body. She looked up at the tree line. Stepping out of the shadows was not a war party. It was a single man, Black Fox. He didn't have his war paint on. He wore simple buckskins. He walked past Lena, not looking at her, and went straight to the dead hitman. He kicked the revolver away, then looked at the burning shed. He grabbed a shovel, leaning against the fence, and began throwing snow onto the flames. Lena snapped out of her shock. She grabbed a bucket, filled it from the trough, and ran to help him. Together, in the freezing night, the White Widow and the Apache chief fought the fire. When the flames were finally out, leaving only a smoking ruin of the shed, they stood panting in the dark. Silas sent him, Lena said, her voice hollow. I know, Black Fox said. He looked at the dead man. This brings war, Lena. The army will come for this. They will say we killed a white man on your land. Let them come, Lena said, a new, cold resolve settling in her chest. She looked at Black Fox. I'm done hiding. I'm done being the victim. She walked over to Jasper Keen's body and pulled the arrow from his chest. She handed it back to Black Fox. Take this, she said. Leave no sign you were here. And the body? Black Fox asked. Lena looked at the dead killer. She looked toward the town that had rejected her, starved her, and tried to burn her. I'll take the body to town, Lena said. I have a message to deliver to Silas Thorne. The sun rose over Silver Creek like a bruise, purple and swollen against the horizon. The town was waking up to a morning that felt colder than any before it, the kind of cold that cracked tree limbs like gunshots. The main street was empty, save for the wind whistling through the gaps in the boardwalk. Then a sound cut through the silence. It was the grinding scrape of wood against frozen earth. Scrape, drag, scrape, drag. The baker, Thomas Miller, was the first to look out his window. He dropped his dough scraper. Mother of God, he whispered. Walking down the center of the street was Lena Vance. She looked like a specter rising from the grave. Her face was blackened with soot, her coat scorched and torn. Her hair hung in wild, frozen icicles around her face. She was pulling a makeshift travois, 2 long poles strapped to her shoulders, dragging a heavy bundle wrapped in a bloody canvas behind her. She didn't look left or right. She walked with a terrifying, mechanical determination straight toward the sheriff's office, which sat directly across from Thorne's general store. Doors opened. People stepped out onto their porches, wrapped in blankets, their breath clouding the air. They watched in stunned silence. They had been told she was dead or run off. Seeing her here, looking like an avenging angel, struck a primal fear into the heart of the town. Lena reached the center of the intersection between the store and the jail. She stopped. She shrugged the heavy leather straps off her shoulders. The travois clattered to the ground. She turned to the general store. "Silas!" Her voice wasn't a scream. It was a command, cracked and raw. "Get out here." There was movement in the window of the store. A moment later, the door opened. Silas Thorne stepped out, wearing a thick wool coat, a mug of coffee in his hand. He stopped dead when he saw her. The color drained from his face so fast, he looked like he might faint. "Lena," he choked out. We thought—" "You thought your fire killed me," Lena finished. She walked over to the canvas bundle on the sled. With a violent jerk, she ripped the covering back. The frozen, gray face of Jasper Keene stared up at the sky, the hole in his chest stark and undeniable. The crowd gasped. Women covered their children's eyes. "You sent a killer to my home, Silas," Lena announced, her voice ringing off the false front buildings. "He burned my shed. He tried to shoot me in the back, but he failed." Silas looked at the body, then at the gathering crowd. Panic set in. "I don't know this man. This is madness. She's crazy. She killed a drifter and brought him here to blame me." "Check his pockets," Lena shouted to the crowd. "Someone check his pockets." Sheriff Caleb Thorne stumbled out of the jail, bleary-eyed and smelling of stale whiskey. He looked at the body, then at his brother. He didn't move. "I said check him," Lena screamed. The blacksmith, Jensen, stepped forward. He was a big man who had been ashamed ever since the siege. He knelt by the body, ignoring Silas's protests. He dug into the dead man's coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper and a heavy pouch. Jensen opened the pouch. "Gold," he rumbled. "Double eagles." He unfolded the paper. "It's a bill of sale for land, specifically the Blackwood Ridge plot. Dated yesterday. Signed by Silas Thorne." The crowd turned on Silas. The evidence was damning. He had paid the hitman with the promise of the land he would steal from Lena's corpse. "It's a forgery!" Silas shrieked, backing up against his store window. "She planted it." "Enough, Silas." The voice came from the porch of the hotel. A man in a long gray duster stepped down. He had been staying in town for 3 days, claiming to be a cattle buyer. He walked into the street, his spurs jingling softly. He opened his coat to reveal a badge that caught the morning sun. "U.S. Marshal Thaddeus Holt," the man said. "I've been tracking Jasper Keene from Wyoming to here. He's wanted for 6 murders. The marshal turned his steely gaze to Silas. "And it looks like you just hired him for a 7th. Silas's eyes darted around like a trapped rat. He looked at the marshal, at Lena, and at the angry faces of the townspeople who had finally realized the monster living among them. "I did it for the town," Silas yelled, his composure shattering. "She's a traitor. She's breeding with the Apache. If we don't wipe them out, they'll kill us all. I was trying to protect you." "You were trying to steal my land because there's silver in the creek bed," Lena said coldly. Silence fell over the crowd. "What?" Silas whispered. "My husband found it before he died," Lena said. "He told me. He told you when he asked for a loan 3 years ago. You denied the loan, waited for him to die, and have been trying to drive me out ever since." The greed on Silas's face had been his undoing. He wasn't a patriot. He was a prospector with a badge. Silas realized it was over. His hand twitched toward the pistol under his coat. "Don't," Marshal Holt warned, his hand hovering over his own piece. But Silas was desperate. He drew. Crack. The shot didn't come from the marshal, and it didn't come from Lena. It came from the jailhouse door. Silas Thorne crumbled to the ground, clutching his shoulder, his gun skittering across the ice. Caleb Thorne stood there, his service revolver smoking. He was shaking, tears running down his face. He had shot his own brother. "I'm done, Silas," Caleb wept. "I'm done doing your dirty work." The marshal stepped forward, kicking Silas's gun away and hauling the screaming man to his feet. "Silas Thorne, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and attempted arson." He looked at Caleb. "You too, Sheriff." "For the kidnapping of that child back in November." Caleb nodded, dropping his gun. "I know." Lena stood amidst the chaos, the adrenaline finally fading. Her knees buckled. Jensen the blacksmith caught her before she hit the ground. "We got you, Lena," Jensen said softly. "We got you." As the marshal led the Thorne brothers away in chains, Lena looked toward the end of the street. There, at the edge of the forest, barely visible in the tree line, sat a lone figure on a spotted pony. Black Fox. He raised his hand in a silent salute. Lena raised her hand back. The townspeople saw the exchange. They looked at the warrior, then at the woman who had bridged the gap between two worlds. They didn't reach for their guns. For the first time in the history of Silver Creek, the fear was gone. Lena Vance did not leave Silver Creek, nor did she remarry. She rebuilt her woodshed, expanded her cabin, and lived on Blackwood Ridge until her death in 1934 at the age of 79. The silver mine was never opened. Lena refused to sell the rights, declaring the land a nature preserve in a legal battle that made headlines in the Montana Standard. But the most remarkable part of her story wasn't the gold or the guns. It was what happened every year on the first snow of November. According to the diaries of Reverend Jacob Halloway, found in the chaotic archives of the Montana Historical Society, the town of Silver Creek became a neutral ground. Every winter, a delegation of the Apache, and later their descendants, would arrive at Lena's cabin. They brought venison, blankets, and stories. And among them, a man named Chayton, the boy who had been carried through the storm, grew up calling the white woman on the ridge grandmother. When Lena died, the town didn't bury her in the church cemetery. Per her will, she was buried on the ridge, facing the mountains. Her tombstone, paid for by the estate of Chayton Black Fox, bears no scripture. It simply reads, Lena Vance. She walked through the storm so that others could see the dawn. What an incredible journey of survival, courage, and the breaking of barriers. Lena Vance wasn't just a survivor. She was a force of nature who proved that humanity can exist even in the harshest of winters. Her story reminds us that sometimes the enemy isn't the person across the border, but the greed within our own hearts. I hope this story kept you on the edge of your seat. It took a lot of research and effort to bring the siege of Blackwood Ridge to life for you today. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more dramatic tales from the Wild West that history books tried to forget, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who loves a good twist and hit subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Comment Silver Creek below if you made it to the end. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.